this has kind of become, I think last year we recorded one about this time and this time of year. And so these are always fun to reflect on your past season and whatever else trouble we can get into and talk about. But
Well, I'll tell you what, this last year was wonderful because retirement is not overrated. And I retired from my main job. I'm still doing a lot of other things, but
sure.
there are things I want to do. So retirement's awesome. And right now, this time of year, I look out the window and there's snow everywhere, still clinging in the trees. So there's no scouting to be done until that's gone. So not much going on. Still working on the book.
Yeah, yeah. So a new book's going to be released later this year. What has been the biggest like obviously everyone works towards retirement at some point in their life and they think
Yeah.
of in their head what it's like what is that going to be like, and from what you thought it would be like to what it is it better or worse or about the same?
Oh, it's way better. I was actually concerned because our kids are gone. I was concerned how my wife and I would get along being in the house alone together all the time, but we actually get along much better now than we ever did before because there's no stress. She retired at the same time, and she does her things, I do my things, and we do things together, and we call the kids up for dinner and or breakfast to go to the restaurant, and yeah, it's great. I come upstairs every day and either write articles or answer emails or go on my YouTube videos and reply to replies
Yeah,
but it's all stuff that I passionately like to do. So that's fun.
yeah, that's really cool. I was going through some of the past videos that we did I was trying to find some funny comments that I could bring up, but honestly the 90% of them were very very positive and appreciative of your communication. There was multiple people that were in that thread that basically said I've emailed John and he replied to every single email I've ever sent him and was really thoughtful with his replies. And I think that says a lot about how much you care about actually helping other people become better hunters. Because no one's paying you to reply to a cold email. You're doing it because you love that and you like to help people become better hunters. Has that
I've
something?
actually,
Go
I've
ahead.
actually in the last 2 days, I've had guys ask because I probably spend at least 2 to 3 hours a day answering emails and replies on YouTube. Um, and in the last few days, I've had two different replies for how do you go about getting hunting access. And I hope Greg Godfrey doesn't hear this, but I wrote a chapter in the book about about access, and
Hmm.
I just, and that book's not even published yet. I just emailed them the chapter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the
Yeah, they're not
entire
going to buy the book.
chapter finished.
What could you give a tip or two that you think maybe people don't do when because you're right, a lot of times this time of year people are reflecting on their past season. If it didn't go well, they're more than likely looking for different access, maybe to switch up their strategies. And in terms of access, I
Mhm.
mean, what's a tip or two that you have? Because you hunt all public or permission, like that's part of your hunting DNA,
That's my
and that's
main.
how it's always been.
Yep.
So how do you go about that? And I know you've gained permission all across the country too, like Kansas, Iowa. Uh, yeah, I know you hunted public in Illinois. So what are some key tips on getting access?
Um, well, the best way to get access is through friends and relatives. Talking to people at the gas station. If you go in the county seat for any reason, talking to the ladies at the county seat because they know every farmer in the area. Um, so networking through people. If you go to church, your kids' friends' parents, just networking locally through your the people you talk to and are friends with and are relatives. And shockingly, even though a relative may not own land themselves, they may have friends that own land.
Sure.
You just never know, and somebody's much more likely to give somebody permission if they're friends or relatives of somebody that they trust.
Hmm.
So that's probably the best way. Knocking on doors, if you are going to just cold turkey knock on doors, dress nice. Not in a suit, but dress nice and casual. Camo may be a fashion statement to hunters, but it's not to property owners.
Hmm.
Don't drive up in a big 4-wheel drive truck with stickers all over because they're not going to probably want that truck parked in their yard if they're in a neighborhood with other neighbors that are anti-hunters. They want
Hmm.
to get along with their neighbors, so they want to keep everything as low profile as possible. And be nice, always be courteous. You're representing the rest of the bow hunting community. If they slam the door in your face, say, well, thank you for your time, before they do, and move on to the next.
Hmm.
And I obviously, if you're looking for property locally, or even if you're looking for something for out of state, now it's kind of cool because now you can go on the internet and actually get an overview of all the properties. And if you've got Onyx, you got the property owner's names. So you got a huge head start from what you had, 20 years ago and beyond.
Yeah.
And then you could possibly even write letters. I've written letters, what I do in the community. So things I'm affiliated with, family. I put my phone number on it. Say I'm talking about hunting. I'd like to ask you permission to, bow hunt your property. I would be the only one. That's a big key part. Is always ask just for yourself, or possibly if you have a young child, one of your kids. Never ask with a group of people. They're much less apt to give you permission if you got a group of people than just a single person, because a single person they view as being a little bit more serious. That's kind of what I do. I write letters, and then I will give them a approximate date or time that I'll call them back or visit them in person if it's local. And that just airs a sense of seriousness.
Yeah.
And people are much more apt to give you permission if you're serious. I say I'll take care of the property. As far as not putting trash out there. And a lot of farmers, they don't get an opportunity to go out in their woods. They're busy. Farmers are very busy. So you can also say, if you do allow permission, I'll keep you updated. If you don't get out in your own woods very often, I'll keep you updated on what's going on. You'd be surprised how many times you get permission and there's people trespassing on the property.
Yeah.
And the farmers had no clue.
Yeah, there's no presence there, and I think sometimes they like to give permission to someone so they can say, well, no, so and so hunts it, and you overlook it a little bit and make sure that there isn't trespassers. Do you think letters have become more effective as we become more of a digital world? Because I'm just thinking, if I was a landowner and someone took the time to take a pen and paper and write a thoughtful letter, I feel like that would be pretty impactful. I would have to assume, because they're probably not getting a lot of actual handwritten letters.
They're getting none.
Exactly.
They don't get handwritten letters. Yes, it does air a seriousness about it. And, farmers, I enjoy talking to farmers. Farmers are way smarter than people give them credit for. They watch the news in the evening. They know what's going on in the world. They know what's going on politically. And I actually converse with some of the farmers from out of state more than the people I do at home. And probably the person I converse with the most is a property owner up here by where I live that gave me permission quite a few years ago. Yeah, I've just been really, it's been really impressive to me how smart farmers are about everything that's going on in the world. If Jay Leno did the sidewalk thing with all the Ivy, and Harvard and Columbia University, where the students are freaking idiots for the most part about anything in history. If he did a walkthrough of farming communities and talked to farmers, he would get a lot higher percentage of correct answers.
Yeah. Do you think that the media, because I agree, I think farmers are very sharp. I think they're very in tune. I think they're very resourceful. And they have a lot of really good attributes. Do you think that the media portrays them as kind of the perception that you're alluding to for the general public? Do you think that's on purpose for some reason? Or
of course it is. The mainstream media, farmers are typically conservatives, and the mainstream media hates conservatives. So yeah, of course they portray them as not being very, very smart. I mean, look at what happened in the Iowa caucus. You watch CNN, and they're just talking about they're a bunch of stupid, redneck farmers. Basically, I mean, they're not saying it in that term, but that's the way they portray them, because they don't want their base to think, well, those guys are smart and they voted for a conservative. Maybe I want to look into this.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. No doubt about it.
That's definitely very interesting. Talking about, comparing times from the past and into today, do you think it is harder or easier, and I'm talking for your style of hunting, to kill a record book buck? So if you could go back 30 years from ago, and was that easier than what it is now for your style? I understand private's changed.
Far more difficult.
Really?
Far more. I'm sorry. It was far more difficult back then.
Okay.
It's much, much easier to kill a buck today than it was back then.
Why is that? What are some reasons?
Because Well, I live in Michigan. Michigan used to have almost a million gun hunters. Okay. And every gun hunter shot at every 3-inch spike buck or bigger. So very, very few bucks lived beyond a year and a half old. Okay. Nowadays, I don't care what state you're in, even in Michigan, there's lots of managed properties, lots and lots of hunters are passing on 1.5-year old bucks. There's just a lot more bigger bucks now than there used to be. It's not even remotely close.
Really?
Killing a 2.5-year old buck in the 70s and 80s with a bow was a huge deal.
Hmm.
Now a lot of people don't even reach for their bow if a 98, 9 or 105 or 10-inch, buck walks by.
Hmm.
That
So,
never, that was never the case. It was a big deal back then to shoot a year and a half old 6 point back in the 70s. Only back in the mid 70s, DNR statistic wise in Michigan, 2% of bow hunters shot a buck.
whoa.
2% of licensed bow hunters killed a buck. 7% shot a deer. That would be a button buck or a doe and a buck or a buck. Whereas
Wow.
now it's over 25% of bow hunters shoot an antlered buck, and I think it's 40+% shoot a deer.
So do you think that it's the management that's making it easier to kill bigger deer because people are passing them, or do you think it's some of the tools that are available, or combination of the both, or do you just simply think the biggest attribute to that is people passing more deer and the age class inherently increasing? And Michigan's like a almost on an island of its own with the culture and how it's progressed. And you can tell me differently if that's wrong.
No, I think you're right. I've hunted in a lot of states. PA used to be on plane with Michigan. I think West Virginia is still on plane with Michigan. But PA, when they went to their APR, uh, you know, 4 points or better in the ag areas and 3 points are on one side or better in the timber areas. Uh, they're considerably better now than Michigan, but they used to be on par with Michigan.
Hmm.
But back to let's see, your question was okay, age. Yeah, people are letting bucks go, and anytime bucks, if they're year and a half old, first year antlered bucks, if they are allowed to pass by hunters without consequence, obviously the next year when they're 2.5-year olds, they're still going to move more during daylight, than they would have otherwise if they were targeted as year and a half old by every human that they walk by, every hunter.
Hmm.
So they're not, as they age, if they're not getting shot at, it's just like TV. You watch TV and 4 and 5.5-year olds come out in a pick cornfield an hour before dark. Uh, that would never happen in a pressured area where there's consequences for deer, would have been consequences for those bucks as they were growing to that age. They
Hmm.
wouldn't do that. If they did, they'd already have been dead.
Hmm.
So yeah, so there's a lot more of them. There's a lot more bigger bucks to shoot at because people are letting them go, and they're a lot easier to kill because they haven't had any negative consequences with hunter interactions while they've grown to whatever age bracket they are.
Hmm. So that makes perfect sense. Do you think you mentioned that they're easier to kill, and I think there's a lot of tools that people uh you know contribute to what makes it easier. Do you think it's the tools that are making it easier, or do you think that it is the fact that they are not having negative consequences with hunters at, let's say, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, and they're just getting bigger?
I think it's a combination of the two. You look at crossbows. Now I personally don't view a crossbow as a vertical bow. Um, and I think they're wonderful for people that are old enough they can't draw enough poundage, like myself. I'm only drawing 40 pounds. I should be shooting a crossbow maybe, but I'm not. I refuse to. Um, but there's a lot of healthy hunters now that are hunting with a crossbow. Over, I think, in about every state that passed full inclusion crossbows, 10, 12 years ago, over 50% of the bow hunters in the field are using a crossbow. So that's obviously a much easier tool. You don't have to practice. It's a one size fits all. I can hand you a crossbow and you can shoot it. It doesn't have to be fit by a bow tech for your draw length and your arrow length and the right rest and everything. So that makes it much easier. Plus, they can shoot longer distances without practicing. Um, and then the buck ages also. They like we just discussed. They grow to bigger sizes without any negative consequences. And also, Onyx makes it much, much easier. Now you can pull up Onyx and find little islands and find places to go. And you mark, waypoint, mark them. And then when you go out scouting, you can look for those spots. Back in the older days, back in the days we were referring to 20 plus years ago, Onyx didn't exist. If you found something, it was on foot. One of my state record buck I shot in Michigan, I found by 1981, I saw this tips of some trees out in this huge cattail marsh that had a lot of water in it. And, I had to go get a pair of chest waders and wade out there and find it and look around. And that's where I ended up shooting that buck. I mean, that island nowadays would be super simple to find on Onyx.
Yeah.
And then you just waypoint mark it and you could follow it through the cattail. You got your trail marked and everything. There's a lot of advances that make it easier to find locations, but the downside of that is everybody has that available. Back in the old days, nobody would have walked out there in waders. I never saw presence of any human ever on that island.
Yeah.
And that was in Michigan, public land.
Which, that was one of the things I was going to mention of, does that make it easier as well does it make it easier and harder because some of those hidden gems that you almost would have stumbled upon in the 80s or 90s or maybe even early 2000s. And now I feel like the quote unquote secret spots are so far and few in between at this rate. Or do you think that there's still a lot of people that wouldn't put in the effort to go and actually hunt those? Like, it's one thing to identify something on the map and say, that's a cool spot. Man, I'd have to get hip waders, or I have to get a kayak, or I have to get a canoe, or I have to get a boat. Do you still think that those spots could still produce very well? Or do you think you have to or what's the next step beyond that? Because if people can all identify it, and then if there's enough dedicated hunters to go try those spots, what's next? I mean, what do you do?
Well, that's a very valid point, because now that they are accessible to everybody just by looking at your computer screen, there are definitely more hunters that are locating those, and the hardcore hunters are actually going out and setting up on them. That's still a small number. When you throw waders and hip boots and wading through water and toting a kayak or a canoe, that eliminates a whole bunch of your competition, because most hunters are just too damn lazy to do that. Because it does require a lot of extra work, carrying an extra pair of waders with you and changing at the edge, and then when you get to the spot where you want to step out of the water, then you got to change back into your regular hunting boots. It's a lot of extra work, tripping and falling on the little mounds when you're walking through swamps and marshes, and all the little humps and valleys, and you step foot in a muck spot and you sink down to your groin. that all is the stuff. Or crossing a river with waders. Those are things most hunters are not willing to do. So it's still an advantage to get to those areas, because that's where deer are pushed to. During preseason scouting ventures or early season hunting, that's where they push the mature deer to that have lived through a gun or a bow season. But still, most hunters are not willing to put forth that much effort.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of to put you on the spot here. So you mentioned, you're 72 years old. You pull back 40 pounds. Is there a point where you pick up a crossbow, or do you just stop bow hunting when it gets to that point? And I know it's a really hard question because you're not there right now.
Oh, it's not a hard question.
But you had a thought of it. Like, that's had to be a thought that's crossed your mind.
I almost got a ticket in Illinois one year because I shot in 2008. I had rotator cuff surgery on my right shoulder, and I was shooting a 35-pound bow, and their limit was 40.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. I didn't get a ticket, but I could have, because I wrote an article in Bowhunter magazine about that buck. I killed a monster 12-point with that 35-pound bow. And so now I'm more concerned about the legalities of going below 40 pounds. And to be perfectly honest, I have a backup bow identical to my bow, and I put it at 45 pounds, and I really struggled to draw it. I mean, 40 pounds right now is my limit, and it hurts. It hurts to draw it and shoot it. But I would have no problem, none whatsoever, going down to a 30-pound bow. If it were legal. because with the technology of bows today, my 40-pound bow is considerably faster than my 60-pound compound bow I shot in the 70s.
It's crazy.
Considerably faster.
Uh-huh.
So a 30-pound bow, I'm sure, would be equally as fast as my 60-pound bow was, due to the technology, using the right weight arrows and a small, small cut, fixed blade cut broadhead. Um, yeah, I would have no problem going down to 30, but I'm pushing the crossbow thing as far away as I can. I just, to me, anytime there's a healthy person that takes a big buck with a crossbow, to me, there's always an asterisk in front of it.
It's like the steroid era in your mind for baseball.
Yeah. Or football.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I think, it's a kind of a polarizing topic. And I feel like sometimes people feel like they have to tiptoe around it. But I think the way you describe that is probably how a lot of people feel, whether they'll admit it or not. But I think that's how a lot of people would admit that.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
Of course that's the case, because younger people that buy them and say, "Oh, my shoulder's hurting," or this or that, I got aches and pains. That's BS. They just don't want to have to practice, and they want to be able to shoot twice the distance. And they say, "Well, it's no different than hunting with a vertical bow." Well, if it's no different, then why don't you use a vertical bow?
Yeah.
It's just like a vertical compound bow is a bigger advantage over
a recurve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of guys hunt with trad bows because it gives them a little bit of an excuse if they don't kill something, or it gives them a good excuse why they shoot a 2.5-year-old instead of stepping it up and targeting 3.5 or older bucks, because, well, I'm hunting with a trad bow. There's always excuses for everything, and I'm not afraid to call people out on it.
I know that's the fun part. That's the fun part talking with you, is because you've and there's something that I really respect. It's like, you've been around for a really long time. I mean, we were talking a couple weeks ago, I think it was. I know. And like, you went to the first ATA show ever, and you have seen the hunting space grow to whatever it is today. And in one question, talking about like 30 years ago,
the bow hunting space, the gun hunting space has actually declined, because I also went to the SHOT Show every year. But gun hunting numbers have declined. Bow hunting numbers have increased big time.
Mm-hmm. So comparing 30 years ago to today, and then knowing what the trends that you've seen unfold over the years, what do you expect 30 years from now for the sport of bow hunting, archery hunting, whitetails?
I truly expect, and my son Chris, when he was around, he lived in Europe, he lived in Germany for 25 years, and European hunting is very different than here. It's a sport, or I'm not going to say sport. Killing animals is not a sport, but it's an activity in Europe that's primarily for the rich. So I see America trending in that direction, as more and more hunters want to lease up as much property as they can, so that they can have more opportunities and grow bigger bucks. It's pushing the little guys out. I can remember I was doing a seminars at the Wisconsin Deer Expo a few years ago, probably 10 years ago. And I had a guy come in my booth, and he was from Iowa. And he was talking to me, and he was my age. And I said, "Well, why are you at the Wisconsin Deer Expo if you're from Iowa?" Wisconsin enters more P&Y bucks than any other state in the country every year. They always have. But Iowa, because they have less bow hunters, they have a higher Pope and Young entry rate per licensed hunter than Wisconsin does. And they kill bigger bucks on average. So I said, "Why are you in Wisconsin when you live, in Iowa?" And he said, "John, I used to be able to hunt most of the local farms around me," and he was in zone 5. And he said, "Now everything has been bought or leased, and I have no place to hunt in my own area. I used to hunt everywhere." So, Wisconsin, like Michigan, it has a lot of public land. So I come up to Wisconsin to deer hunt. And I just think that's sad. I mean, that whole zone, you get in zones 4, 5, and 6 across the southern area of Iowa. Most of the properties are leased up or bought up by rich people, and that's trending across America. And that was interesting, because 20 years ago or so, Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska, Missouri, North Dakota. Though you could go to those states and kill monster bucks pretty regularly, whereas you couldn't kill bucks of that size in other states because the soil has more minerals in it, and they just grow bigger deer. Just like they have a higher crop yield per acre.
Mm-hmm.
They have bigger deer and bigger antlers per same age group. But now it doesn't matter what state you buy or lease property in, because of the management and the way they do management nowadays with putting minerals in the soil, growing food plots. You can do that any place. So while those Midwestern states are still the best states, you can go to Florida, you can go to Georgia, and you can go to South Carolina, states that used to have severely low P&Y entries per licensed hunters. And those states now have a lot of managed areas. People own a lot of large properties or lease it, and they manage it, and they're killing big bucks.
Mm-hmm.
So things have changed in that perspective as well. There's lots of places in Michigan where there's co-ops where there may be 10 or 20 property owners in a given region, and they're all managing with the same mindset. So that whole region is they're taking 3.5-year-old bucks pretty consistently every year.
Mm-hmm. So with that being in mind, for like assuming that access will continue to get challenging for residents of states or people that can't afford to buy a piece of ground or lease or choose not to, what do you think happens overall to hunting? Do you think we lose hunting numbers? Do you think that those people that are really want to hunt will find a way to scrounge up pennies in order to lease something or go to public, and then the public becomes even more overran than to what it is today? And I mean, what happens? Because this is what you mentioned. I mean, you've been saddle hunting forever, right? A long time, very long time.
1981, so 42 years.
And one of my favorite things is like you mentioned, hunting out of a tree stand's archaic, and so now saddle hunting has gotten a lot more traction and has become a household tactic in the world of hunting. So that's something that you've seen a long time ago. You saw that trend, you saw it being superior. So I just didn't know, with that same modeling of just seeing how things happen in the future, like what truly, like, I'm 29. When I'm 59, what is hunting going to be like in the Midwest?
I'm
for whitetails?
assuming you are a successful young man, Jake. So I'm assuming you will always have a place to hunt because you also have a passion for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of bow hunters that, they view it as just an activity of something to do. It's a hobby. It's a passion of yours. It's
Mm-hmm.
a passion of Chad's.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people like yourself will always have a place to hunt. But stuff's going to get leased up. Public lands are going to be more pressured as time goes on because there's going to be less private lands to have access to, pre-permission access to. So obviously public lands are going to be more pressured and people are going to opt out of hunting.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a fact. I've seen that happening already.
Do you think that's a bad thing or a good thing?
I think it's a terrible thing.
Why is that?
Because I don't want, even though I'll be dead, I don't want to see hunting going away. Mm-hmm. The less support there is for hunting by hunters, the more probability it is for anti-hunters and PETA people throughout with lawsuits and stuff to bring hunting down. They would bring hunting down as much as they can. They don't understand the conservation efforts that go along with hunting. There is no more predator prey species going on anymore. We're the main predators, and our DNRs control deer herds and to the best that they can. And so once, if hunting were ever to go away, it would be an ugly scene because just like, when trapping raccoons, when raccoon prices, coon hides went down, nobody traps them anymore. Now they're a nuisance.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime there's nothing to take care of the animals, everything kind of gets out of hand and out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
They're in nature. There's a fine balance between everything, and our DNR departments do the best they can to keep that balance, in practice. So as time goes on, people are going to opt out of hunting public lands, other than the serious guys. You know,
Sure.
there's going to be hardcore guys like myself that are younger now that we're going to grow up, and they're going to keep hunting public lands because hunting is a passion of theirs. But to guys that it's not that big of a passion, it's more of a hobby, they're going to drop out. Just like I quit gun hunting. I quit gun hunting because public land in Michigan for gun season was, you know, I had a bullet hit 6 inches over my head.
Seriously?
And in 1991, that was the last time I deer hunted with a gun during the regular gun season.
Yeah.
I will still go out in the late season and shoot does for the freezer if I need them, but there's nobody out there in December, so it's safe.
What? Tell me the story about that. That had to be extremely scary. I mean, 6 inches
Yeah,
between life and death.
Yeah, it was in 1991, and I was hunting on public land, and I was sitting underneath a pine tree, you know, on a green bucket, basically. And, you know, and I had a little makeshift ground thing in front of me, and I was leaning up against a pine tree behind me. And all of a sudden, I heard a bang, and the tree of 6 to 12 inches above my head, just, you know, the bullet hit the tree. I never saw the hunter. And you got to keep in mind, this is in a high-powered rifle area. So that bullet could have came from, you know, several hundred yards away and ricocheted.
Yeah.
You know, and hit the tree I was in. But I never saw the hunter. I never saw deer. That was the last time I hunted during gun season. I got up and left, and that was it.
Wow.
I have nothing against gun hunting, but I mean, in certain areas on public lands, you know, gun hunting is just not safe.
Yeah.
And I've seen when I was working in the sporting goods store up in at Jay's in the 70s, I had a guy come in that was hunting public land, and he was probably 40. I was in my late 20s. He told me, and I was working in the bow department. He told me he got shot by an arrow on public land, and I didn't believe him. You know, usually if you get shot by an arrow, you're gonna die. And he had a polo shirt on. He pulled his shirt down. He had the most beautiful little X right here and the most beautiful little X behind his shoulder. And he said it missed my lung by about a half of an inch.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. He said I was walking down a lane right at dark. He was coming out of the woods, and a 16-year-old boy in a tree thought he was a deer and shot him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
an anomaly situation.
Sure.
That's really rare for a bow hunter to get shot like that. But with a gun, no, that's not an anomaly, because a lot of gun hunters shoot at sounds, for God's sake. I mean, it's a small percentage, but it happens.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, as we, like, for someone listening to this that says, well, I don't want hunting to turn into what it may, based on what you're describing. I mean, what as a community can we do? I mean, that's
nothing you can do.
That's the scary part, right?
No, I don't think there's a thing you can do about people buying and leasing land and hoarding it and managing it and keeping everybody off. That's just part of capitalism, man. That's just the way it is.
Would you say you're a capitalist at heart? Would you fall into that category?
Oh, I'm definitely a capitalist.
So it's just the way it goes. Like, if
I'm definitely into people immigrating legally into this country and becoming millionaires. You know, capitalism. I'm not a person that believes in everybody should live in the same level like you see in China and Russia, and you know that, because anytime you have that, there's no desire to better yourself, because bettering yourself, you're not going to make any more money.
Yeah.
You know, you're just going to share it with everybody else. So yeah, I'm definitely for capitalism, and people that want to succeed can succeed in this country. So yeah, I'm definitely for capitalism.
Okay. And so what's one thing that you think the general masses in the hunting community has wrong about John Eberhart? What's one thing that you think you are maybe misunderstood, or maybe there's two things you want to share, but what what is that? Because, you know, it's like the internet's an interesting place to begin with, but, you know, I think I just want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'll tell you what. As little as 3 years ago and beyond, I had a lot of trolls that were bashing me up, mostly on scent control. But on a lot of other things. He's egotistical, he's an arrogant dick, blah, blah, blah. And that's not me. I'm confident. I'm confident in what I talk about. I've been in this industry since the 70s. I probably know it as well as anybody in the country as far as the intricacies of what's happening in the actual marketing industry of the archery
Yeah.
business. And I just, people just give me a bad rap. But that was years ago. If I posted anything on any site concerning scent control, because as you know, I'm a big scent. I don't pay
Yep.
attention to wind. I'm a big scent control freak. I would get pounded, and by whose people.
Sure. Sure.
And probably by other people. And that doesn't happen anymore. On that video, I just posted video on my Eberhart Outdoors YouTube channel. I just posted video number 119.
Nice.
And I haven't had one negative response out of 100. And I think this morning I looked, there was 140 replies.
Mm-hmm.
I just posted it a week ago, if that. And I haven't had one negative response. That never would have happened 3 years ago and beyond. So, and I think it's because I'm getting a lot more support. When somebody says something negative, a lot of other people come on and bash them because they know it's not true. Beat me up for being an arrogant dick or I'm just passionate about scent control, and I'm a detail oriented guy, and people that aren't detail oriented can't do it.
Yeah.
That's just where it's at. So, but hell, even years ago, 15 years ago, when I'd go on Michigan Sportsman, which is a talk forum, an online talk forum, it got to the point where it didn't matter what I answered. Somebody could ask a question about a primary scrape area, and I'd give them a pretty long and very detail oriented answer, and somebody would come in with 3 words, that's bullshit, or 2 words, that's bullshit, just because they didn't like me. I don't know why, but that's just that's the way it is. You got to expect that. It doesn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
And it never really did. My son Chris said, "Yeah, don't even respond to those guys. Anytime you respond, you're just giving them credibility." So I've tried to learn to do that, but that's very difficult to do when they get really bad. I have to respond.
So yeah, and I think anyone that gets to talk to you and get to know you, like when we record the Whitetail Cribs, we're able to grab lunch with you. We've been in touch ever since then, and I think you're kind of just slightly misunderstood by some categories of hunting, and I think that I don't know why that is always either too, but I think I mean yeah.
When you say categories, you mean because I push the public land and free permission. I always push that because 99.9% of all bow hunters, if they get to a level of hunting personality where they start getting offers to go hunt on somebody's managed property or go hunt on a paid hunt ranch in lieu of saying something nice about the paid hunt ranch on your channel or whatever forum you have, they do it. And that's something I have not done. I know how difficult it is to kill mature bucks in heavily pressured areas. That's what I like to do. And I know as soon as I would take advantage of and go kill a buck on any semblance of managed property, I would lose my credibility.
Sure.
Because hunters don't like to think somebody might be a little bit better than them.
Yeah.
That's a hit on their ego. So they have to knock them down. And as soon as you do anything wrong or cross the line of what you're talking about, how you're hunting, they're going to beat you up for it. I mean, you look at Noel Feather, what happened to him? He shot a buck in an enclosure and tried to enter it in a different state's record book.
Really?
Oh yeah. And Noel Feather was a big name back in the 80s. Yeah, and he was, after that he was gone. It was over for Noel Feather. He had calls and he had all kinds of stuff with his name on it. There's been several times I've ripped up entry forms when I was a CBM scorer. I just quit doing that a couple years ago. But I'd have guys try to enter bucks in the record book that were shot in enclosures. And, we had one of our scorers, he entered a buck as a new state record crossbow kill, was 182-inch typical. And the enclosure guy that owned the enclosure where he shot it in, because he didn't make it, he made it a wild deer in his story. He was on the cover of our magazine, full page cover.
Wow.
The enclosure guy called the president of our records keeping club and said, "Hey, he shot that in my enclosure. I got a picture of him with it, and he not only shot it in my enclosure, he shot it with a gun, not with a crossbow." I mean, so obviously he got kicked out, and I'm getting off track here from where you were, but
Yeah, that's still fascinating. I think. Why would someone do that? Do you think? Like, did you end up asking or having a conversation with any of
ego,
those people? Like, why'd you do it?
ego.
Uh
It's
huh.
all about ego. Hunting is a very egotistical activity.
Uh huh.
You know,
For yeah, I
I
could.
don't think there's any other reason other than ego.
Uh
You
huh.
know, when you're in a store, we used to do in stores, somebody bring out their phone and they'd show somebody a picture of a buck they shot. Well, now it's competition.
Hmm.
Now everybody's bringing out their phones. Well, this one's a little bit bigger than that one. Well, look at this one. And look at that one.
Hmm.
It's an ego thing.
Uh
It's a
huh.
head thing. I'm very proud of what I've done, but when I'm talking to people in groups of people, I'm listening to other stories. I'm not trying to tell my own.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely very interesting. Is there anything else where you think that people misunderstand you or like what your motives are for uh, like in this space?
I don't know how they could misunderstand me. Everything I do is free.
Yeah.
I'm not paid by Scentlock to endorse Scentlock. I wouldn't care if Scentlock said all kinds of nasty things about me. Scentlock has the patent on using activated carbon in their hunting clothing, so nobody else can use it.
Hmm.
So that's what I use, and it works.
Uh huh.
And so I would endorse it, whatever they said about me, because it's the only thing out there that I know of that works.
Hmm.
To not pay attention to wind. Um, and I help hunters. I help hunters as much as I can. Hunting is something that consumes so much of a passionate hunter's time and money. And if I can help them become more successful, they're a happier person. They get
Sure.
along better with their wife during deer season.
100%.
You
Yeah.
know, I've got stories, testimonials about that, many of them over the years from guys. Man, the guys in my community, I'm hunting public land and now I'm killing respectable bucks for the property I'm hunting.
Hmm.
And people, when I go in the sporting goods stores, they treat me differently. I get along better with my wife during deer season because I'm not under such stress to do things.
Hmm.
And then they end up hunting smarter. They actually hunt less time, they just hunt smarter.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think a lot of people misread me thinking I'm doing everything to feed my ego, when in reality I'm doing it to help other hunters become more successful.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. So talking about, I want to talk a little bit about like the hunting less to have more success, because I think for a lot of people, I think earlier in their hunting stage, wherever they're at, they feel like they have to be hunting so much in order to continue to have an opportunity. And I think as people get more experience, and this is just me basing this off of a lot of conversations had here on this podcast,
Mhm.
what do you think that balance is of hunting less for more success? Like, is there a couple of different examples or some key things that people should consider
Oh,
going into 2024?
yeah, there's lots of things. Sometimes people hunt properties. Let's say you own 20 acres, and it's got a small bedding area and everything else is open timber, and you got some oaks, or maybe you got a lost apple tree in the timber someplace. A lot of guys will want to hunt that, throughout the season, from early season through the October lull, when the mature bucks in that area, if all the bordering properties around them also are hunting, those mature bucks that they're trying to kill, they're nocturnal. They don't move during daylight if they're in a pressured area. And yet they're out there. What they're doing by hunting when they shouldn't be is they're altering doe traffic. Anytime you alter doe traffic at a location by over hunting it during the period when the mature bucks you want to kill are nocturnal, you're altering the mature buck activity once the pre-rut happens, because once that doe activity is altered during, they're not going there anymore during daylight because you've overhunted it. Well, obviously the mature bucks that are pursuing those mature does during pre-rut, they're not going to be at that location either during daylight, because you totally altered the doe traffic at that location. If you left that doe traffic totally alone and not even hunted on your property, maybe after the first 2 or 3 days of the season, you totally left it alone until like October 28th or something.
Hmm.
pre-rut, that doe traffic is going to be regular. It's not going to be spooky, and you're going to go in, and there's a lot higher probability because the doe traffic's going to be coming into there, and they're used to it. They're not spooked.
Hmm.
That a mature buck is going to show up as well
Hmm.
because he's at the point where he's pursuing those does.
Yeah. So you think
And
one common mistake is people hunting their farms too early, too often before it really gets good?
yeah, and the mountain type of pressure in the area also dictates that a lot. If you're on TV, if you're a TV guy and you're managing your own property, you can go kill deer pretty much anytime you want. Obviously, it's going to be easier during the early season because you have no competition and they're going to be in a summer routine
Hmm.
during the first few days of the season. Whereas in pressured areas, just the postseason or preseason scouting and location prep by all the other hunters in the deer's core area is going to make them nocturnal, a mature buck. He's lived through a couple of gun seasons, so he knows what that influx of human activity means. So he's going to turn nocturnal before the season even opens. Whereas on managed property, because there is no competition, those deer continue their regular daytime movements, so they're easy to kill during, the early part of the season and even during the lull because there's no pressure and they haven't been targeted until they reach a certain age. So
Hmm.
the amount and type of hunting pressure the area you are hunting in receives, not necessarily just the hunting pressure on your specific little parcel, but the combination of all the parcels around you that are within that buck's core area, because he moves through there too. Even if he beds on your place and he moves out into these other properties at night when he's feeding, he's going to smell where they've been. He's going to smell where they've been. He's going to know there's been a huge influx of human activity, and he's going to turn nocturnal before season even opens.
Hmm.
So that has a lot. The amount and type of hunting pressure has a lot to do with daytime mature buck movements. And if you're hunting smart and you realize that, you'll hunt the first few days, hopefully trying to catch a mature buck in his summer routine, still moving maybe in the daytime. But once those first several days are over, leave the area alone. Hunt smart. If you want to feel like you're hunting, set up in a tree in your yard, or if you got a friend that invites you to go hunting, go screw up his property. You know,
Right.
but hunt smart. Hunting. The more you hunt doesn't necessarily mean the more opportunities you're going to have.
Yeah.
The smarter you hunt, the more opportunities you're going to have.
Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest challenge most hunters
And let me interject
have.
something else. A lot of locations are strictly for mornings or strictly for evenings.
Hmm.
A lot of guys like oaks that are dropping acorns, or apple trees that are dropping apples, or in the South persimmons that are dropping whatever the hell they drop. Persimmons, I guess. you know, those are destination feeding locations. So a lot of hunters, they'll have something prepped in a destination feeding location, a natural one like that, and they'll hunt them in the mornings, and they're spooking the very deer that are feeding there with their morning entry. When you're hunting spots like that, those are evening locations. You can go in when there's no deer there, set up and catch them coming in the evening to feed. Bedding areas, when people are hunting interiors of bedding areas, which I'm a big interior bedding area hunter, especially during the rut phases. You can't go in a bedding area, or you shouldn't. I shouldn't say you can't. Your odds of killing a buck in a bedding area with an evening entry are far less because depending on the size of the bedding area, an evening entry is an intrusion, and you may spook deer while you're going in. You may not spook the very deer you want to kill, but even if you're spooking does and subordinate bucks and fawns, you're pushing them in the direction of the deer that you may want to kill, the direction he's going to be coming from. So you're spooking deer, and you're going to alter his mindset on move. He's not going to come in the direction all these deer are spooking from when he
Right.
gets up to move in the evening. So those are morning spot locations, and you have to be in them at least an hour and a half before daylight, before a
Which is
mature buck
a
makes
lot
that
earlier
transition.
than, yeah,
Yeah,
like
before the
99%
mature buck
earlier than most people.
transitions into the bedding areas. So you got to
Yeah.
be in there in the morning, and bedding areas are best hunted on all day sits during the rut phases, pre-rut or peak rut.
Hmm.
You're in there way before daylight, before anything transitions in. They're still out feeding, whatever they're doing, and you don't leave until a half hour after dark which gives them a half an hour to leave the bedding area before you get down and transition out. So you're not spooking them with your exit either. Yeah, there's a lot of layers in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Do you talk about some of those things in detail in your new book, or is it more?
Oh, yeah, this book's covering everything.
I look forward to that.
There won't be a nut unturned in this one.
Yeah. And something I know you talked about postseason scouting a lot, but I know that I believe in your opinion, is one of the most important times to set up success for the following season for anyone that's semi-local. So you mentioned there's too much snow and everything else right now, but when does the gun go off? John, go postseason scout. When is that, and what do you do?
As soon as the snow's gone. I
Uh-huh.
never scout when there's snow on the ground, because as soon as season's over and you start getting snow, if you're in a snow belt,
Yep.
Deer change. They don't stay bedded deep in the swamps. There's no hunting anymore. The pressure's off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they move out. They move and they bed in lower lying areas usually, where they're out of the cold winds, and they usually always move to an area where they're closer to whatever the preferred winter food source is. So sign that you see in the snow, if you went out scouting when there's snow on the ground, is meaningless, because the deer are not bedding in the same places they will be next year during season when there's physical hunting pressure every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I always wait till the snow is totally gone, and that's when I start scouting. And usually you've got at least a month and a half to scout and prepare new locations. And if if you've got a lot of places or you don't have a lot of time to scout, do all your scouting, your postseason scouting first, and you can, once everything starts to green up, you can go back and prep your locations during the green up, in May and possibly even into June.
Mm-hmm.
Get all your scouting done, waypoint mark all your stuff on Onyx or whatever system you use. And then, then once all your scouting is done, go back and prepare the locations you chose.
Mm-hmm. And there's people that are all different phases of hunting that listen to this podcast. So what are some key things that you're looking for during postseason scouting? Primary scrapes, bedding areas, all the above. What are some things that get you really excited and you tell yourself, I need to have this spot prepped because it's really good?
Okay, and that's another reason you wait till the snow melts, because you can't see scrapes on the ground if there's snow on the ground. They get covered up. So, yeah, primary scrapes are hands down my number one targets to look for. Over 50% of the bucks I've shot in the last 40 years have been scrape oriented, without question.
Mm-hmm.
Number two thing I look for is mast and fruit trees. In Michigan, in Ohio, there's a lot of Midwestern states that used to have apple orchards, or a lot of timber areas that used to be pastures where kids or farmers would feed them apples, and they'd walk through the pasture and, dump apple seeds on the ground. And then those pastures are let go and they're timber. They may be 50, 60-year-old timber. And there's apple trees spewing around, in some areas. Some places have lost apple trees out there. So I'm looking for, white oaks. That's my number one oak preference. Then red oaks, and apple trees are even above those, because usually if you find apple trees, they're not as common, obviously, as oaks.
Yeah.
So that would be food sources, natural, isolated food sources. 3 would be interiors of bedding areas. You can go in a bedding area and you can rape it during postseason. You can spook every deer out of there every day for 2 weeks straight, and it's not going to affect next fall's deer movements in that bedding area whatsoever. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
You can scrutinize every inch of it. You can look and find the little openings, find where there's a cluster of rubs, or find, I said scrape area, didn't I already?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. You mentioned primary scrapes.
Openings, and you can just find runways. The runways are still there from last fall. Everything's just easy to see. And a lot of times when you cross a river with a pair of waders, you may go through a little small area, bedding area, and then it opens up into a regular, beautiful little timber area with, an oak ridge or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, once you cross areas and get into these bedding areas, they open up into something a lot more beautiful than what you expected. Mm-hmm. So those are the 3 primary things. I also look for funnels, between an area A and an area B. I'll look for a pinch point. Mm-hmm. And one thing, every single location, water holes is something else I look for. If there's water a water location in an area that's otherwise devoid of water for at least a quarter of a mile in any direction.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hot spot for early season hunting when it's warm out because deer have to drink. But one thing every single location must have, every single hunting location must have, is it must have some semblance of perimeter security cover around it, and it must have transition security cover to a known bedding area. Because if you have a feeding location and it's got the adequate perimeter security cover around it, but it doesn't have adequate security cover to transition through to get back to the bedding area, he's not going to be there. If he's there in the morning, he's going to transition through the open timber back to the bedding area before daylight. Whereas if there's adequate transition security cover to the bedding area, he may wait until just after daylight before he transitions because he's got security cover to transition through.
Mm-hmm. And so
they don't like to, mature bucks in a pressured area do not like to be exposed in open timber or open areas like you'd see on TV. Mm-hmm. They always want to be within 1 or 2 bounds of security cover where they are safe.
Mm-hmm. So within 1 or 2 jumps of being basically completely secluded, where when they stand there, they can look and their whole body's basically covered and you can see their eyes and antlers poking around, trying to figure out what's going on.
To give you an example of that, I was hunting public land probably 15 years ago. No, it was longer than that, a long time ago. And I was hunting in a pine tree. There was a grove of white pines, and they were mature. They were pretty tall. And right to my left, and I was in my saddle, so I'm hanging at 6 o'clock, and at my 9 o'clock, there's an opening. And it's probably 15 yards, a 15-yard opening.
Mm-hmm.
To my south is autumn olive, just dense autumn olive bedding area. And then that kind of went around to the west a little bit. And then from there north, it turned into a marsh with water, marsh grasses, cattails, and tamaracks. It was a tamarack swamp. And I can remember it was a morning hunt. It was going to be an all-day sit. And I started hearing about, 7:30, 8 o'clock, I heard these deer kind of chasing through the autumn olive. And autumn olive, as you well know, the branches are really brittle, and they break really easy. So it was real easy to hear these deer running through the tunnels in these autumn olives. And I knew it was a buck chasing a doe because he'd chase for about 10 or 15 seconds, and then they'd stop for 20 minutes. So he was breeding her and then she was probably laying down, and he probably laid down 10 or 15 yards downwind of her, and then he'd get up 20 minutes later and go push her, and they'd run a few yards and he'd breed her again. Well, they kept getting closer to where I was at. I started hearing them before daylight. Mm-hmm. And as they got closer, finally the doe broke out into this little opening, and she stopped right in the middle of this little weedy opening. And she turned her head and she looked back behind her. And I could hear the buck coming up through there, and he was grunting. And he got his nose right to the edge of the autumn olives. And he's standing there staring, he's like back here to me right now, and she's right mm-hmm. there. And he's staring out into that opening. He's looking at that doe and looking around. And then she flicked her tail, like, come hither.
Right.
And he stood there, and I was, I had sunlock on, and so I wasn't worried whatsoever about getting winded. And he would not come out into that opening. He would not be vulnerable in that little tiny opening. He's on public land in Michigan. Mm-hmm. And he's probably 150-inch deer. It's one of the biggest public land deer I've ever seen in Michigan. Mm-hmm. And he turned around and went back into that autumn olive, and she turned around and went right back after him.
Wow.
He would not commit to walk out of that autumn olive.
So what could you have done different in that setup? Could you have been in a different tree? Or
no,
is it, okay.
No, there was no shot into any of that autumn olive from any tree.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Autumn olive is just a dense canopy of stuff, and they kind of move through they got tunnels underneath it.
Just shrubs and not much grows underneath it, and usually a bunch of trails intersecting through there. One thing that I wanted to bring up, Deer and Deer Hunting recently did a magazine article, and is it true that you've been coined the best deer hunter in America? And what do you have to say about that? And I say that just because it's kind of fun.
That was a total shock to me. I did a guy interviewed me. He's a freelance writer. He's been a freelance writer for a lot of years for several magazines, and Deer Hunting wanted to do a feature article on me, and I don't think they've ever done that on a hunter before. And and I've been writing for Deer Hunting for quite a 10 or 15 years. But anyway, we did it, and the issue finally came out. It's in the February 2024. It just hit the newsstands, and I was on the cover of the magazine, and I did not full page. I did not know that was going to happen. A couple of the different guys actually sent me pictures of the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know it was going to happen. They emailed it to me, and I was like, "Whoa, that's really cool,"
Uh-huh.
And then I got my magazine, and when I opened it up, it's a 6-page article he wrote about me in huge bold print across the center of both pages of the 2 pages of the article. First 2 pages, it says, "Is he the best bow hunter in America?" And while I was very flattered by that, I was not really that happy with it. I did not know that was going to be there.
Uh-huh.
I called the guy. I had talked to the guy earlier, and he said, "I think you're the best bow hunter in America." I never thought he would write that in there. He said, "I've interviewed a lot of people, and you're the most detail-oriented bow hunter I've ever talked to by far." And I said, "Well, that's because I hunt pressure property and free permission property against a lot of competition. And most of the guys you interview are personalities that hunt managed property where they don't have to be detail oriented to kill the bucks they're killing."
Mm-hmm.
And he agreed with that. But anyway, yeah, there cannot be a best bow hunter. That's impossible. There are far too many differing terrain features in this country. You got hill country, you got swamps, you got Louisiana swamps, you got big timber, you got ag areas where there's 80% ag and little tiny woodlots like you get in northern Ohio and northern Indiana. You get hill country where the ag meets the hill country, and every single terrain feature, prairies out west, North Dakota, Kansas, every terrain feature requires a different skill set to be really good at it. So there's no way of having a best bow hunter because there's so many skill sets required on different terrain features.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just thousands and thousands of phenomenal bow hunters across the country that hunt public lands. To me, anybody that's hunting managed property could never be in the conversation of being a best hunter because you can't measure anything if it's not against competition.
Yeah.
You couldn't measure, the GOAT like Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods or Jack Nicklaus or Michael Phelps. They compete against a pyramid of hundreds of thousands of people to reach the icon or GOAT status in their sport.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've physically competed against hundreds and hundreds of people when they've played, but the hundreds and hundreds of people that they've competed with when they reach the pro level and they're the best of all the pros, those hundreds and hundreds of people that they've competed with in the pros have competed in a pyramid of other people as that pyramid goes down. Mm-hmm. So, they are true icons, or there can be a true GOAT of a sport. But because bow hunting is done on so many differing types of playing fields and hunting properties, there could never be a GOAT, or mm-hmm. there could never be a best. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, guys that are consistently taking the best bucks public properties that they're hunting on have to offer, they would be in the conversation because mm-hmm. they're competing against other hunters. If you're not competing, you can't measure a skill set, period. Yeah. On anything.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a question that everyone probably talks about, whether they're driving down with their friend on the interstate, and they who's the best deer hunter in your opinion. I think it's something that we've all talked about, and I think sure. and I think what you're saying is exactly right, because it's so hard to measure, and it's maybe there's a guy that's the best at managing his farm and doing that, and maybe there's the best Michigan public land deer hunter. Like it's almost like there's so many different subcultures within hunting, which makes it fun and interesting because there's a lot of ways to have success, and success means different things to different people. But it has to feel kind of cool though that that's written though.
Yeah, it was very, very flattering. And I mean, I'll be honest, there was times I can't hunt like I used to at my
Hmm.
age. My body's worn out. But there were times 15, 20 years ago when I was in my prime, I mean, my mid, 50s, probably 45 through 65 years old, or probably 35 through 65 years old, where, yeah, I felt like I was, of all the bow hunters I'd ever hunted with,
Uh-huh.
I felt like I was far superior to any of them. And I hunted with some of the better bow hunters in Michigan
Hmm.
and that had a lot of bucks on their walls, but they all owned their own properties.
Hmm.
And, I was never impressed by their entry and exit routes, how high they were in a tree, their scent control regiments. They didn't have any. They were hunting out of tree stands where I was hunting out of a saddle, which is another big advantage.
Yep.
So I have always thought about, I considered myself definitely in the top echelon.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that is a conversation I think that a lot of people do have. And unfortunately, there's thousands of bow hunters out there that are killing, the best bucks the property the public land has to offer. And they'll never get credibility for it, other than outside of their friends and maybe the local hunters in the area,
Hmm.
uh, because they're not in the public eye.
Which I think is a lot of times probably their preference, and I don't think that's a bad preference to have in reality too. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you're definitely right. There's a lot of guys that want to keep everything under the rug and low profile.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think a lot of them would like to have a little bit of credibility, but they don't know how to go about doing it.
They have an open invitation to the Exodus podcast. So if someone's listening to this and they feel like they're in that category, I would
Well,
love to have them on here.
like that guy I had, you guys had
Yeah.
David Baronet.
Yeah.
Remember him?
Yes.
I think Chad is the one that went there and interviewed him. That wasn't you,
So
was it?
yeah, we did that. We actually, I think we did that one the day after we recorded your whitetail group. So I remember being at his place and recording that, and we recorded a podcast on his porch outside. I remember that. It was in
Yeah,
this.
we talk all the time, and David is a premier bow hunter. He would definitely be, in a conversation for the type of terrain he hunts.
Hmm.
He went to, I think I mentioned before, he went to his biggest Michigan buck's 123, and he'd been
Hmm.
hunting for 40 years.
Hmm.
And he went to Iowa on his first two public land hunts in Iowa when he went by himself. On his very first sit on both of those Iowa hunts, he shot a 158 and a 171. And
Yeah.
in 40 years of bow hunting in Michigan, his biggest buck's 123. He hasn't even shot a Pope and Young buck in Michigan, but he's a phenomenal bow hunter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about moving to a more white? I know you like fishing a lot, but have you ever thought of just moving to an area that has a more big deer?
No, I know guys that have done that. I
Uh-huh.
know two guys in particular that have done that. And, they were from Michigan.
Uh-huh.
And every time they'd come back with a 140, 55-inch buck from like Iowa or Kansas or Missouri, everybody would like, oh, wow. No, I'm going back 20 years ago.
Uh-huh.
When people weren't killing the bucks in Michigan that they are now,
Sure.
and everybody would freak out when they see these big bucks coming from these other states, and so they both moved, and they didn't know each other. These are two totally
Mhm.
separate guys, and they said after about 5 years, it was like now we're killing 160-inch bucks regularly, but we're just another hunter.
Yeah.
They don't get the recognition because everybody else. I mean, a lot of people out there are doing it.
Yeah. It's every area, every state has its own baseline and whatever that is. And so I think that's sometimes a hard thing when it comes to comparing who is the best hunter, for example. It's you have to compare what the baseline is of opportunity to where they're at and where they're hunting
At
and then
100%.
what are those are what percent are outliers of what is truly the average of the area.
Yeah, you just couldn't measure somebody's wall.
Yeah.
The wall means absolutely nothing. It's where they're hunting and who they're hunting against to get that wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid point. And unfortunately, and I know people don't like to hear this, but it's just a fact. And you guys, Chad's even told me this. He said, Chad told me this in person. He said, the guys I've interviewed from Michigan have been the most successful guys when they go out of state on,
For
as
sure.
far as percentages.
Yeah.
He said, and it's because they have to be more detail oriented in Michigan to be a decent hunter.
Yeah.
And, and usually it's your better hunters that have the desire and the passion to go out of state. So they're very successful because
Hmm.
you don't have to be as detail oriented when you're in a lightly hunted state
Hmm.
to kill big bucks. That's just a solid fact.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think a lot of different people that we talk about that hunt in challenging states, and they do go out of state and they do have great success
Yeah.
because they have to go at it with such intensity versus, I mean, I grew up in Illinois. I know I'd be a better deer hunter if I grew up in Michigan because I had been better deer hunter. And so like you can get away with more. And I think it's like creating some level of form of like bad habits. And like
Yeah.
I don't have a scent regimen that you do. I don't. And when I hear how hard it is and how much attention to detail it is, I'll just play the wind. And well, whether that's right or wrong, call me lazy, but that's I think where a lot of people fall into.
And that's another thing I couldn't consider in my personal opinion. I couldn't consider somebody that plays the wind in the conversation of the best hunter because if you took two bow hunters and they
Uh-huh.
had the exact same woodsman deer hunting skill set as far
Hmm.
as knowledge about deer and scrapes and how to hunt, and one of them had to play the wind and the other guy didn't have to, obviously the guy that didn't have to play the wind could hunt whatever location he wanted whenever he wanted to hunt it.
Yeah.
So he's going to get a lot more deer sightings. He's going to have a lot more opportunities, and that's eventually going to end up in a lot more kills. So if
Hmm.
those two same guys were hunting the same property for a period of time, there is no question the guy with the scent control regimen that works
Hmm.
is going to outperform the guy that doesn't have the scent control regimen that has to pay attention to the wind,
Hmm.
and he's definitely going to get winded here and there, and it's also going to affect how he cannot hunt certain locations when he needs to be in those locations
Hmm.
because the wind's not correct.
I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, that
I
definitely makes sense.
hunted. Sorry to interrupt, but with the tethered guys, we had a 16-person hunt in a midwestern state on public land, and
Hmm.
um, all 16 guys were from different states, and I was very impressed with these guys. Very, very impressed. And this will be out in videos this summer and fall.
Hmm.
But there was one guy, Jared Schaefer. He works for Tethered. He lives in West Virginia, so he
Mm.
lives in hill country.
Okay.
I don't. I
Hmm.
live in rural slash ag and timber.
Hmm.
Um, but because where we were at was in hill country, it was in one of the southern parts of one of the Midwestern states where it's all hills. It was very obvious to me because every night people were coming back and talking about how they were hunting and thermal hubs and thermal drafts and how they had to play the wind and stuff, and and guys were getting busted on a regular basis or they couldn't hunt. They saw a buck over there in the distance because the foliage was down when we were there, and and they couldn't hunt it because the wind was wrong. But Jared shot, the second biggest buck. There was two good bucks shot in the upper
Hmm.
130s, and Jared took one of them, and it was very obvious to me that of all the guys that were there, he was the best hunter for that type of terrain feature
Hmm.
because that's what he's used to where he lives.
Does he follow your scent regimen?
No, I
He
was
doesn't.
the only scent guy there, and I you really want me to go there?
I mean, it's up to you.
Okay, well, if you got time, at the end of the hunt, there were 7 bucks taken during this trip between 16 guys. I had opportunities to take 2 bucks that would have been as big as 5 of the bucks that were taken, but
Hmm.
I didn't because they were all 2.5-year-olds basically. Jared and another guy shot 3 or 4-year-olds. They were up in the upper 130s.
Hmm.
So at the end of the hunt, one of the guys asked me, we're all sitting in the living room. We're all leaving the next morning. A couple guys had already left. One was from North Dakota and one was, I think, was from Colorado. Um, but a guy said, well, John, doesn't look like your scent control regimen did you any good. You didn't kill anything. and I mean, we're all sitting there and that just hit me wrong. I said, I'll tell you guys what. And they're all quiet. Okay. I've been sitting here every night listening to all of your stories. You got winded. You had a 150-inch buck on camera because all these guys filmed all their hunts.
Hmm.
That was one of the criteria to get on this hunt. You have to film your stuff, and you also have to have some semblance a platform to kind of advertise this thing
Sure.
when it comes out. And I said, I listened to all your guys' hunting, and you had a 150-inch buck 8 yards from you. You're holding the bow in your hand. In the actual video, you can see your hand with the bow in it. You're ready to draw. And this buck's looking straight at your tree. He's just standing there motionless, kind of straight at the tree. And all of a sudden you said you felt a little gust of wind on the back of your neck and that buck busted. I said, I heard so many times of, guys getting busted or they can't hunt this location because the wind's wrong, but they know there's a good buck there. And I'm like, and I laugh inside. I never said a word to any of you guys all week, but I could have hunted any of those locations or I wouldn't have to worry about getting busted.
Mm-hmm.
And, other than Jared and this other guy, Dustin was his name, I could have shot bucks as bigger than any of the ones you guys shot, other than Carl. Carl shot a 100, pretty nice 120 incher. Mine was the ones I passed were about 110 and 115.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you guys don't have scent control. I'm the only one here with scent control. And then this one guy said, well, I don't believe in it. I said, yeah, but you know nothing about it. Tell me something about activated carbon. Well, I know you can't reactivate it. And I'm like, that's it? That's all you got? Of course you can't reactivate it. You can't reactivate activated carbon back to its pristine state because it has to be heated at 1450 plus degrees Fahrenheit while it's under pressure. So of course you can't reactivate it. All you've got to do is deabsorb it enough for more deer hunting purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Reactivating it is bringing it back to its industrial pristine state with no molecules on it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So of course you can't reactivate it. You guys know nothing about activated carbon. I've studied this topic lengthy. I send documents to people that request my scent control regimen. It's 11 very detail oriented documents. And you guys bash something you know nothing about. In my opinion, you're just too lazy to try it, or you're not detail oriented enough to do it, or
Mm-hmm.
it's just too much work. You just don't want to do the extra work. To me, if you're passionate about something, you do whatever work it takes to make you the best you could possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
There is no excuses. And, unless, so if you don't want to do what you have to do to be the best you could possibly be with the technology that's available to you, don't complain when you get winded or you can't hunt this spot because the wind's in the wrong direction or the thermal drafts busted you.
Yeah.
Or swirling winds busted you. And I was pissed. I was literally pissed, but they all listened to me, and I've had several of them actually ask me for my scent control documents.
Yeah. That would have been it's like you got up on the soapbox and finally got to speak your piece there.
Oh yeah, I wanted to do that, so I was actually glad that guy brought that up.
I could imagine you're kind of biting your tongue throughout that week. I have to imagine.
Because nobody can argue the power of activated carbon with me. Nobody. I know it inside and out better than probably as well as anybody other than a scientist. That's all they do is study activated carbon.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, no, that's really fun. So tell us a little bit more about the book, and then I'll let you go about your day. I'm sure you're really busy with your retired life. But
yeah, I'm sitting there drinking. I'm debating whether to sip on coffee or a Diet Coke. That's how busy
Big decisions today.
Well, the book is going to be a general bow hunting book. So it's going to have chapters on postseason scouting, location preparation tools, location preparation, hunting access, hunting out of state, entry and exit routes, early season hunting, hunting during the lull, sparring around standing cornfields, pre-rut hunting, peak rut hunting, post-rut hunting, late season hunting. There's scent control. It's going to have a very detail-oriented scent control chapter. It's going to have
trail camera.
You're
going to talk about trail cameras.
It's going to have a motion camera chapter, which you guys are definitely in because I use your cameras and I love them because they're easy to use and I'm a tech idiot. So it's going to have camera. It's going to have. It's probably going to end up with 30 chapters, but it's also going to have probably 2 or 3 chapters that are saddle hunting oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm writing it in conjunction with Greg Godfrey. I've written the vast majority of it. But Greg's going to do the saddle hunting accessory
Mhm.
chapters, or
Mhm.
chapter, I should say, because I'm not even though I'm a saddle hunter, I don't follow all the gear. I'm not a
Mhm.
gearhead.
Mhm.
So he's going to do that. And we're going to have a chapter on how to hunt from a saddle and how you work out your hunting positions and how you maneuver around the tree. Um, so it's going to be a saddle slash bow hunting book, but it's going to be a book where it doesn't matter if you're a saddle hunter or not. This thing's going to have information about
28 chapters about that are applicable to anyone.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they may be convinced to try saddle hunting too.
And this is my fourth book. So, and this is my last book.
Mhm.
So this is going to be the mother load of all of it. And we're planning on doing it in a paper book, an ebook, as well as an audio book.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really exciting. Where could people, I assume you're going to sell probably on your website,
Yeah.
Amazon, or where else could people keep an eye out for it?
It'll be on my website for sure.
Hmm.
And I will do a YouTube video when it is available.
Hmm.
I'm sure Greg Godfrey will. I've also got some. You ever heard of Andy May?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Andy May's got a couple little short kill stories in there that fit specific chapters where it fits in.
Hmm.
Mark Kenyon has a couple. Garrett Prawl has a couple kill stories in there, and I've got a ton of kill stories. They're all short. They're condensed.
Hmm.
Any place from 3 to 5 paragraphs long. And Greg will have some kill stories in there. So there's lots of kill stories. There'll probably be almost 70 kill stories
Oh, wow.
that will fit in the chapter that kill story mostly pertains to.
Hmm.
That lends credibility to that specific area, to that specific chapter.
Yeah.
But they'll be available on Amazon. I don't know how we're going to sell the audio books, but that's above my grade at the moment. But Greg said that's not a problem.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure they'll be sold through Tethered when they're
Hmm.
available.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to that and really appreciate your time. And I'm sure you're chomping at the bit for the snow to melt so you can go do some scouting.
Well,
Maybe not.
yeah, no, I am. I'll tell you what. I may be old, but I'm ready.
Yeah, and that's something I like. I guess take this as a compliment. I would never guess you're 72 years old.
Well, thank you.
I really
I
mean that.
don't feel like I'm 72. I feel like I can still outwork and out climb most hunters that are in their 20s.
Uh huh.
Um, but I work out, so I keep in shape to be able to do that,
Hmm.
and I'm proud of it. But I will say, as I'm aging, there are trees, and I did one last year. I have this one tree in a really good spot. I shot a buck out of it, and it's a really big, huge diameter tree. And I have to bypass a lot of big limbs to get up to my hunting position. So I'm hunting now. I'm hunting out of a little bit smaller tree that's still within the same kill zone area because that tree is difficult for me to climb now. It's becoming more difficult. I just don't have the hand strength to hold on
Hmm.
to the steps and stuff as I'm going up as I used to. So I
Well,
am getting a little, but I mean, most 99% of hunters wouldn't even get in that tree. There's
that's what
no
I was
way.
just gonna say. Yeah, yeah, you're
No
still,
way.
yeah, still in good shape for
Yeah,
what you
I've
do.
had hunters come to some of my spots and I'd walk them by a tree and they'd go over and start climbing it and they'd get halfway up and look down at the ground and climb back down.
Because you're like a 25-foot minimum guy typically, right?
Yeah,
Typically.
typically because most of my hunting is pre-rut and rut oriented. When the foliage is down, I like to get up at least 20 some feet to my feet so that I'm out of a deer's peripheral vision so I don't get picked.
Hmm.
Because deer in Michigan and a lot of other states, heavily pressured states, they tend to walk around looking for hunters and trees.
Silhouettes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it, John once again. Look forward to the new book and look forward to talking again here soon.
Well, thanks, Jake, for inviting me to do this. I love doing podcasts with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
You bet.